Welcome back to Track Talk. We're going to be doing another game of the 1830 tournament that we've been following. This is actually the game that I played in, so you can see I'm one of the players. And we'll run through this game as always, but I just want to introduce our co-commentator. We've actually brought KingZombie onto the channel to give his perspective and keep me at least somewhat neutral during the commentary. So welcome to the channel, KingZombie. Great to have you.
Hey, great to be here. Howdy, friends. So glad to join Track Talk today.
Yeah, so
Big fan of this channel.
you've been a big part of the community recently with your 1830 league, and now you have 1846 and some other ones. What is the story there? Are you going to keep expanding to different titles, or are you kind of maxed out for now?
For right now, we've got four leagues going. I think that's kind of a lot to manage right now, and a couple of them we're kind of struggling to get more players. So we want to fire a diverse group every week when we play.
Yeah, I
But
bet.
yeah, something I want to do more of for sure. I created my Discord channel, The Long Good Night, really as a way to just kind of find people to play live games with online on dot games, 18xx dot games.
Yeah, I think that live play is definitely a different skill set than asynchronous play. So I think that's very important to kind of build that up, and I'm glad to see you doing it. Um, for 1830 specifically, where does that rank on your list of favorite 18xx games? Is it a high up there, or is it something you avoid playing? What do you think?
It's high up for sure. I would say it's definitely top three, and it kind of ebbs and flows, right? It depends. I'll play a game a whole lot for a while, and then I'll get kind of burnt out on it and shift over to something else. It really just kind of ebbs and flows.
Yeah, I understand that. When I started my 18xx journey, I kind of decided to do a depth first search of the genre. So I was going to play, one title 100 times and then pick another title and move on from there instead of playing 30 different titles one time each. So I've kind of stuck to that philosophy throughout my I guess exposure to 18xx and just kind of slowly working through it. Um, but 1830 is definitely probably number one or maybe number two for me. How many games of 1830 do you think you've played?
Probably approaching 150, I would say,
That's a good number. Yeah. All right.
something like that.
Well, should have no trouble following this then. So I think we will just jump into the gameplay here. Clumsy Puppy R, I'm going to just call him R for the purpose of this recording because I'm not sure how to pronounce the last name. Triple J, and then me, Track Talk. So before we actually get into the actions of the game, when I first got assigned to this game and saw that it was live, I was just looking through the players, and the thing that jumped out to me was that Triple J is a very skilled player. He's been in the tournament before, made it to the final. He was always in the higher ranks of the 18xx.tools league when that was a thing. So I know that he's very strong, and I see that I'm right behind him in priority, and I'm just kind of quaking in my boots because I think that that's a very disadvantaged position for me. So right off the bat,
Sure.
I'm feeling a little bit behind the eight ball. Clumsy Puppy, I've played before. He's kind of a known entity from my perspective. And then R is totally unknown to me. So coming into this game, I'm expecting to be, probably second or third in terms of chance of winning. I feel that Triple J is probably a stronger player than me, and Clumsy Puppy is probably a weaker player than me, and I have no idea where R Shiro or R is going to fit in. So that's just my initial impressions. And with that, we'll jump in. Clumsy
That
Puppy.
background that you did, kind of get some information about the players can be really, really helpful, right?
Yeah,
Um, if you know a certain player's style or kind of, what they typically do during the game. A lot of people, don't have a huge repertoire of different strategies, right? They kind of do the same thing every time in these games until they really learn them well.
yeah, absolutely. I think, having a general idea of someone's skill and then also how they tend to play the game is pretty important. And if it's available, you should definitely take advantage of that information. Um,
Absolutely.
Puppy's going to lead us off on the D&H. I think the D&H is a solid private. Very reasonable to bid on that. Do you have a favorite private or a private you tend to prioritize in the auction?
I try and get either the M&H or the CNA. If I do get the D&H, then I really want to get the Champlain or the Schuylkill Valley along with it.
Sure. Okay.
I think
Um,
Mohawk and Hudson is kind of my comfort level. I feel like the Camden Amboy, it can be tough to get that buy-in for full value, and if things don't go your way, you can get kind of stuck.
sure. And you got to get the Camden Amboy for a reasonable enough price, so it's kind of dependent on the other players um,
Absolutely.
giving it to you. Yeah, the M&H is kind of a happy median, I would say, in terms of the private auction. R is going to take his first action. He goes on the Camden Amboy, reasonable private. Triple J is going to contest the D&H. I think the D&H is a strong private, so I'm fine with bidding on it. I'm a little bit surprised he didn't just go on the M&H, just because there wasn't already a bid there. But maybe he wants to disincentivize potential early pull from Clumsy Puppy if I were to go on the Champlain and St. Lawrence. I'm not this player, so I can't read his mind. I'm not sure about that, but he's going to
Sure.
go on the D&H for now. I will round us out on the M&H, and my thinking here is, if there is an early pull, there's a chance I could get it for face, which is pretty darn strong. So um, I'm happy with the way that this has gone so far. Clumsy
Absolutely. Yeah, it looks like it's working out well.
Clumsy Puppy is going to take a bid on the CNA, so everyone has a contested auction aside from myself. And I actually see now that R is going to go back on the D&H. So I'm ready. If someone wants to pull here, I'm all set for it. But as noted, Triple J is a pretty strong player, so it's unlikely that he's going to let me walk away with just an M&H for face. And that's what we see is he does bid on that. So now I'm kind of in an interesting position. Do I want to be the third player on one of these privates, or do I just go for the Champlain and St. Lawrence? I don't usually prioritize the Champlain and St. Lawrence. I don't think it's a very exciting private. And I hate to lock up my early liquidity in it. But ultimately, I decide, if I can get it for cheap and then pressure for the M&H, that's probably a pretty strong position. So I'm hoping that there's an early pull here. And we see that just happens. Clumsy Puppy is satisfied and will be giving me the Champlain and St. Lawrence pretty cheap. So I think that's a pretty early,
I think that was a great play.
yeah, pretty
Yep, that
early
was a
start for me. I'm not sure why Clumsy Puppy pulled there. I don't know that it's really in his interest to do that. Um, we'll see how that plays out as the auction continues. So he's actually going to be first up on the D&H. Do you have a kind of heuristic or guideline for a price for the D&H that you think is, reasonable? Do you have something you won't go above?
I think I really won't go above like 110, something like that.
Yeah. I mean,
And I'm really looking to
110 is definitely up there for me. I definitely probably wouldn't go above that either. And when we start getting above even 100, I'm starting to
right. I'd
question
love to get
myself.
it for like 95. It'd be great if I could get it for that price every time.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. All right. So, and then he just passes out of the D&H. So I think that, I'll try not to be overly critical in my commentary, but already we're seeing some questionable things from Clumsy Puppy, I would say. So is the D&H really not worth just a single bid if you're in Puppy's seat here? I don't think so. I think passing there is too passive. And now he's just stuck on the Camden and Amboy. So he's going to be,
But
either leaving without a private, or he's going to have to, bid up the B&O, or not bid up, but fall on the B&O. It's just, he's just lost a lot of flexibility with this pass.
he has given a lot of flexibility. However, if he really doesn't want the DNH, it seems like if he wins it, then he can't effectively price enforce, R on the Camden Amboy. So there's a case made for that for trying to keep the game in balance and
Yeah,
just saying, hey, you guys duke it out here. If R wins the DNH, then he can't really price enforce him on the CNA, right? So
I think that in
I
either
don't know if
case,
that
you
makes
probably
sense.
could bid them up a little bit. You maybe couldn't take them all the way up to like 245 or something like that, but I think you
Right.
could still make sure they don't get it for just 170 or something like that. But yeah, I hear you. It is
Yeah.
challenging to price enforcing the Camden Amboy is challenging if you end up with one of these medium value privates.
Seems like he's really on kind of like a plan A and or nothing strategy here, which
Yeah,
which like you said really limits his flexibility and his options,
yeah, he's all in on the CNA right now. This will leave us
basically.
between R and Triple J on the D and H, and I'm going to buzz through this pretty quickly. Triple J gets it for 100. We had a conversation about the prices that we would pay. I think 100 is a very reasonable price. Um, so Triple J now has the D and H. I have the Champlain and St. Lawrence, and it's between the two of us for the M and H. The math here gets a little bit interesting. So I think that if you are sitting in Triple J's shoes, you probably don't want the D&H and the M&H. I've played in that position many times, and I think it's just a little bit too much of your early game liquidity to tie up in privates. It's not unwinnable, I don't think, but it is a little bit undesirable. So I'm sitting here bidding across from Triple J, and I'm thinking he probably doesn't actually want this, but he's definitely going to not want to give it to me for too cheap. So he's probably assuming that I'm willing to pay 150 for this because that will leave me 405, and that will still allow me to par a company. Um,
Exactly.
so that's what I'm kind of anticipating having to pay for this private, and that is exactly what ends up happening. So I think Triple J is just showing that he's kind of aware of the game state and playing about as well as I would expect. Everything's kind of no surprises so far, I wouldn't say. So this leaves me, I think, in a decent position. I've got high value privates. I'm going to be able to float. I'm pretty happy, and I'm now out of the auction um, because
Absolutely. $30 in private company income is really great. You
yeah.
know.
I mean, I think that my usual desire to pay for the M&H ends around 140, 145. So I was bid up an extra $5 to $10 above where I'd like to be, but it didn't hurt too much. So I'm pretty happy with it.
Yeah,
Th-
it seems like you're in a really good position.
Yeah. This leaves us with Clumsy Puppy and R on the CNA. And the interesting thing to pay attention to here is not just what price it goes for, but also where priority ends up. Because if Clumsy Puppy ends up losing the Camden and Amboy, they have the least amount of income. They're going to have to buy the B&O, and that will leave R with the Camden and Amboy and priority, which means that he potentially can float the PRR and just get a rocket boost to his start in this game. So this is really kind of a dangerous auction for the table and for the game state. Um,
Sure is.
so we'll just buzz through it pretty quickly. Clumsy Puppy is taking him up a fair amount. Goes for 225. Definitely could have gone higher, and there's really no reason that I can see not to have gone higher. Clumsy Puppy only has $5 in income. 225 for the Camden Amboy is a very reasonable price still. And now he's given our priority and the Camden Amboy. So I'm not really sure why he called it where he did. It seems kind of like an arbitrary stopping point rather than something that was really mathed out or had a lot of, I guess, strong
Well,
rationale.
let's talk about the math just for a second on it.
Sure.
So if you're looking at R's position, 335 is kind of his leftover capital he needs to have in order to float the PRR with
Yeah.
the Camden Amway because it comes with a share, right?
Yep.
So he could have went all the way to 265 on it, and he would have been comfortable. So he could have certainly bid him up a lot more than he did, right?
Yeah.
Basically,
I mean, I totally agree. I'm not sure.
he would have paid more probably,
Yeah. I mean, maybe Clumsy Puppy just didn't want to own the CNA for like 240 or something. But even with the
maybe.
Schuylkill and an expensive CNA, you're still in a good position. So I think that he absolutely could have bidden up higher. But not what we see.
Absolutely.
So we will see Clumsy Puppy fall on the B&O. He pars it for 90. Whenever I see someone parring for less than 100, I'm under the impression or assuming that they're going to be floating. So we see all four players with cash to float companies. Our Chiro, as noted, has above the 335 cut for 5 shares in the PRR. I have above the 402 cut for 6 shares in anything, and then the other two players have enough to float as well. So we're looking at a 4 company float here, and I am third in priority. Meaning that I'm probably not going to get, my first choice of company. I usually like to take the CNO, especially if I have the D&H. I think that's a really strong combo. I don't have the D&H, but
Definitely.
I still like the CNO. So I'm kind of at the mercy of the other players here, and specifically Triple J, because we have to assume that R is going to be taking the PRR. So we'll just see what they do. R is going to take the PRR. He interestingly doesn't float it at 67. He was left enough cash by Clumsy Puppy to float at 71. And if you're going to try and buy in that CNA, having a little bit extra treasury money is pretty nice.
That cushion, yeah, it's really can help out.
So I think R is off to a really strong start here. Triple J is going to do something, pars the NY and H. So I think his two choices were the NY and H or the CNO. He probably sees that he has the D and H, and that's really good for the CNO, but he goes for the NY and H because now I'm going to be forced to take the CNO, and the CNO is a little bit less secure without the D and H, especially in a situation where we're seeing the B and O and the PRR float in the first stock round. And just so everybody's following my logic here, if the B&O and the PRR float together in the first stock round, very, very likely that Lancaster is going to be double tokened before the C&O can get over there. So the C&O without a D&H, the C&O with no access to Lancaster, that's a pretty sad C&O. So I think that's why Triple J is picking the NY&H here, even though the revenue of the C&O in the early game is better than the NY&H.
Smart. Yeah, really, really smart heads up play.
Yeah, I think he's just a really strong player. So we'll continue to note some interesting things that he does throughout the game. So this leaves me a little track talk between the CNO and really just the CNO. You don't want to float the NYC before you see where the NY&H is going. Same thing with the B&M. Erie's not viable in the yellow phase of the game, and the CPR is just a terrible company. So really, I don't have much choice here. I just take this CNO, and then it looks like there were some auto actions there. That's why we got jumped ahead here. But Clumsy Puppy is indeed going to float the B&O. So the rest of the stock round, we're going to move through very quickly here because it's just going to be 4 companies floating, unless you have any closing comments on this stock round.
Yeah, so I think you seem like you're in a really good position, even though you have this kind of 4th best company right now. Just because these trains are going to get pushed a lot harder than they would if only 3 companies floated. So it's very likely you'll be able to get the first buy-in of your private companies. You've got a lot of things to buy in.
Yeah,
a whole lot more than Triple J, obviously.
That's a good point. That's something I kind of neglected to mention is that in this first stock round, you really want to operate or be late in operating order in case you'll be able to be the first person to buy in your privates. And operating 4th instead of 3rd really increases the likelihood of that because you're assuming that all 3 of these companies are going to buy at least 1 2 train. So that's 3 2 trains out of 6 purchased. And then you can buy, all the rest and then the first 3 if you wanted to. It's pretty expensive and painful to do that, but it is possible. If only 3 companies float, it's just not possible unless somebody buys more than 2 2 trains. So I agree. Yeah. All right.
So Clumsy Puppy, floating the B&O right out of the gate, I think leaves him at a pretty big disadvantage. But it also creates a big advantage for someone else, and that someone else, I think, here is you.
Yeah, that's fair. The B&O is just a really hard situation. It's a really disadvantaged private to leave the auction with, and if you've watched our data videos, or if you're watching this video and you want to go watch the data videos, we show the information behind this. But winning the B&O in the private auction decreases your win chance for the entire game drastically. So Clumsy Puppy has put himself in a rough position, but he's trying to make the best of a bad situation, I think. So the B&O, I don't like starting the game with it, but if you're going to start the game with it, I think that you probably should float it. I don't know. It's a complicated decision. I think that we could have an hour-long conversation just on this one facet of the game, but I think
we will someday.
I think that not floating the B&O and just investing in other players' companies puts the B&O so far behind in tempo that it is a very risky company to float later in the game. So I think that contesting the Lancaster tile and floating early is reasonable, but I totally appreciate what you're saying, that it makes it easier for other players to buy in their privates. That's definitely a consideration.
Yeah, we can circle back on that someday. I think he's putting himself, as far as his income, way down from where it could be potentially.
Yeah, he loses the private income. Yeah.
Right.
All right, so we're in operating round 1. Well, I'm going to zoom out just a little bit, and we will see that the B&O is first up and is actually going to lay down south. So, just compounding kind of the rough start of the B&O. The whole reason you float the B&O early here is to contest this Lancaster tile. But now lost this tempo, there's really no advantage to laying Washington here. And furthermore, by laying Washington, you're probably going to be buying more 2 trains, which is just going to make the people later in priority even happier. So really not a fan of this decision here.
Yeah, two trains in this game are typically pretty bad, and especially every one you buy beyond the first one. It seems like they just get worse.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So a lot of things to criticize with this Washington tile lay. He's going to buy a 2 train, buys 2 of them, and we are onto the PRR. So I was worried about having to buy 3 2 trains and then a 3 train. Already, one of those trains has been bought for me. I'm very happy to see that. PRR up is going to head right over to Lancaster. So Clumsy Puppy has kind of lost his opportunity for that tile, most likely. Um, and one thing I forgot to mention is that along with buying two trains, he actually tokened Washington. The B&O only has 3 tokens, and this Washington token is already gone for the rest of the game.
I
Um,
missed that. Yeah, that to me feels like an error in judgment for sure. The
yeah,
the rest of it you can make a case for it, but I don't see any case for tokening Washington.
yeah, especially if you're only going to buy two trains. I think if you're going to buy two trains, well, then maybe you can run a train out of Baltimore into Atlantic City, a train down to Washington, and a train off to the offboard. Maybe that's like pretty hot revenue early in the
Maybe.
game, but I don't know. Dropping the token and just it's not my favorite. PRR is going to buy a single two train. Then the NYNH always has to decide whether to lay towards NYC or the B&M. One thing that came up in one of our videos is that I always assume you have to make the decision in the first round you're operating, but actually you can just buy a train and then lay the tile the next operation. So that would be an interesting thought here, right? Because if you're in Triple J's shoes, you're seeing that the CNO might be able to buy in their private, and then the two companies that I'm going to be thinking about floating are the NYC or the B&M. So if you defer this tile lay, you make it really, really hard for me in the stock round to decide to float the NYC or the B&M because I don't know where this tile is going to be oriented. And you don't actually lose a run because you've already bought your train, so you just lay this tile and then run it in the next operating round. So
That's really heads up play as well. Yeah,
I
that's
yeah,
smart.
it doesn't end up happening here, but it is something that is was brought to my attention by Stephen Yu on a prior video, and I've really had it in the back of my mind since then. I think that's really kind of a really nasty play or a nasty position to put an opponent in by leaving that ambiguity there. Regardless,
And as we all know, it's a nasty game, right? It's all
yeah,
about making these moves that are going to disadvantage your opponents.
exactly.
You know?
Um, so he doesn't do it. He does lay towards the B&M, which is a common decision. We see it a lot in these games. I usually like the NYC, but again, if you're Triple J, do you want to set up a strong NYC with a run into New York for me to float? Probably not. So I think that's why he's going for the B&M. He says if I'm going to float something, I'm going to make him float the less attractive B&M. He's going to buy
Yeah,
a
he
two
might
train.
also get you to upgrade some track for him as well, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Lay that expensive Providence style.
If the B&M floats and in stock round 2 and then operates ahead of the NYNH, which is almost guaranteed to occur, then I'll have to float lay Providence for him probably.
Probably.
CNO, that's my company. I'm going to be heading towards Chicago. I don't think there's really any other opening for the CNO that makes sense. And then I will buy just two trains, courtesy of Clumsy Puppy buying 2 of them earlier. I buy my 3, and then I buy in my privates. So we are into stock round 2. I think that this has been a pretty good start for me so far. And then R with the PRR and the CNA combo is also off to a pretty good start. Hasn't bought in the CNA yet, but is guaranteed access in the next operating round. So no worries for him. Triple J is pretty neutral. Hasn't had an amazing start, but is not in a terrible position. And then Clumsy Puppy is in pretty dire straits, I would say, just from the start of the game. So, anything that you noticed or wanted to comment on?
I look at right now you've got some potentially really good investment opportunities. If you weren't able to float something new, you've got these two corporations, the NYNH and the VNO, that really don't have buy-ins. There's no way for them to kind of rob all the money out of it and dump it on you. They really have to make the companies good and have to make them work if they're gonna win here.
Yeah,
So if you were in that situation where you didn't know what to float, or you were in kind of a bad way potentially if you floated something, investing's not a bad idea.
it's true. We were talking about how Triple J could leave the tile lay ambiguous and make it hard to float the NYC or the B&M. It would be very viable in that kind of situation to just buy paying shares and then wait. The only downside of that is that you're going to be losing priority. So I'll be going last in priority again because I have the most cash to invest. And then,
Hmm.
you know, there are 2 operating rounds, so this hit from the IPO to market will be negated, but you are, losing a little bit of money or just not gaining as much money as you might otherwise because the companies have fallen back. But I agree, it's very reasonable to, instead of floating a new company here, just sit on the good revenue of the now and buy paying shares in these other companies. So I think that's very reasonable. Nobody really has much cash, so we should be able to move through this pretty quickly. Triple J is also passing. Just gonna wait to see what I do with my cash. And now I'm, having to make the decision: do I float? Do I invest in other companies? Or I guess I could pass, but that would be crazy. So that's really the
Right.
decision. And to float, I'm gonna have to sell shares, at least one share, I believe. No, two shares to float. So that leaves the CNO potentially vulnerable to takeover, but nobody really has liquidity to do it. So I'm not overly concerned about it. Also, with just
Sure. I mean, it's a
$30.
liability for you at this point, right?
Yeah,
The CNO.
yeah.
It
Um,
has no money, no money even for a token, just the income it has coming in.
yeah, I early in the game like this, I'd prefer to keep it. I don't intend to just dump it down so far that it's an easy takeover. But
Right.
it wouldn't be the end of the world if I lost control of it. So I decide to par the NYC, and it really just comes down to kind of a mental hang up on my part or just my personal preference. I haven't had much success with the B&M. I don't think it's a very good late game company. It just tends to get trapped in the corner here with a token on New York. It's best case scenario. So even though the NYC's prospects in the mid game and short or early game are a little bit limited, I'm just going to go with that instead. Um, do you think that would be surprising to you? Do you think that the setup for the B&M would be attractive, or what is your take on that?
I'm with you. I think I haven't really had good experiences with the B&M. I much prefer the NYC. More tokens, a lot more viability into the mid and late game. The
Yeah.
B&M just kind of, it seems like you get stuck, and your potential for a big run, very limited.
Yeah, I agree. So one other thing I'll mention here is that I fully aware that I'm going to have to sell C&O shares, but I don't sell them up front because I want people to, run the risk of losing priority to buy these shares. So I'm going to buy as many NYC shares as I can, which is two more, and then I'll sell the C&O shares that I require to meet my par. And then hope that someone gives me priority back. It's a low percentage play, but if it works out for me, then I've leaped ahead in priority that I really didn't deserve to. So that's why I'm doing it in this order. Triple J is going
Yeah,
to
smart, really smart.
Triple J is going to sell two shares out of the NYNH, um, and I was a little bit surprised by this. I think that he's just looking to fill up his market. You retain control of the revenue if you fill your market, and then he can buy paying shares in other players' companies. And I wasn't sure if he was making a move to steal the CNO from me if I were to sell it down. So that was something that kind of surprised me a little bit. I wasn't really sure what his strategy was going to be here, but he does go and just buys the B&O. So he's looking for the high revenue company. Since the B&O has two trains, it's probably going to be running pretty well, or at least better than his NYNH.
Right. Yeah. The B&O player has no choice right now, really, but to, just make the B&O as good as they can. They're set on, just making it kind of a run good companies game for them at this point.
Yeah, and they have no real chance of dumping it on you, so it's a pretty safe investment. I will continue to float my NYC. Triple J is going to
Exactly.
buy another B&O, and then I'm up to 40% of the NYC. Can't afford any more shares, so I have to sell down the CNO to buy my next shares. I do so, and Triple J has done the math perfectly to have enough money to afford one share of the CNO, so he'll be safe from the dump. He buys it. I buy the last share of the NYC, and I will sell one share of the NYC because I'm not too worried about my operating order here, and I just want to go back and buy a paying share somewhere. So I'll deplete the market of the NYNH for one share. And that brings us to operating round two.
Very heads up play. Very heads up play.
Yeah, I think that you
That
always
can matter so much, just taking away that one market share from them.
Yeah, I think that you just can't let people sit on free market shares. It's just saving them with holds later in the game. It's the difference between having the money for the token or not. And plus, it's a cheap share. So why not buy it? And the B&O is going to upgrade Baltimore. So it's really kind of I guess I would say, short-sighted, revenue-focused strategy from Clumsy Puppy so far, really making no progress in developing the map presence, and is just going to run for a few extra bucks by upgrading his home. Not really working on contesting Lancaster at all. Um, runs his two trains for 120, pays it. Good news for Triple J, who is invested in the company and is going to pick up a three train. NYC, this is my company. There's a couple different options here, but I think there's really only one that's potentially viable, and that's to lay Albany oriented northeast to southwest, and then get access to F-18 and potentially a run into New York, potentially a run into New Haven, or just head down to Reading and Allentown if that Lancaster tile looks like it's going to be available. I think any other orientation is a mistake. Um, so that's what I'll do. I'll pick up a three train and I buy a train out of the CNO just to get a second run potentially, but also because I realize that the CNO is not going to be running all of its trains. It's just not possible to develop that track quick enough. PRR heading towards the B&O actually. So I was surprised to see this. The B&O revenue is attractive, but this actually kind of rehabilitates Clumsy Puppy a little bit because even though he hasn't been making any effort to develop good track, he now has access to that east-west corridor that we see so often developing from Philadelphia over to Chicago. So despite kind of being asleep at the wheel, he's actually developed some decent run potential now. um,
Yeah, I was thinking that he was going to upgrade that tile, just to the right of Altoona, and kind of hook it back in and head toward Lancaster after the PR went to Lancaster.
yeah,
But now that's no longer an option for him. It'll be interesting to see where he ends up.
yeah. And me as the CNO, I'm not sure if I'm happy or not happy about this. It's nobody has made any progress with Lancaster, and I'm hoping to eventually get over there. So I guess I'm happy about that. But it's just kind of unusual track development. PR is going to reap the rewards here. Runs for 60 when I think he would have been otherwise running for 30, and also
Very
picks
unusual.
yeah picks up a three train, picks up two three trains even, and that leaves the NY&H up. Since I didn't float the B&M, the NY&H is now going to have to decide whether or not they want to upgrade their home or if they lay Providence. If they upgrade their home, it's $80. If they lay Providence, it's $80. Upgrading their home's a little more revenue, but it also is a pretty big boon for the NYC if he upgrades his home. So I guess there's a little bit of a downside there. Now, that said, I think that the NY&H probably wants to get up into Albany eventually, so allowing the NYC to link up here is not really the end of the world. But he's going to just sit on his track for now and actually teleports over to Scranton. This was kind of like mind blowing to me. This was not at all on my radar. I had no idea that this was going to happen, and I'm not entirely sure why he does it. Do you have any thoughts here?
I'm very surprised. I don't think paying $120 to lay a station marker in a city that's not connected is better than laying it for $40 somewhere that you can connect to. But they're a strong player, so I'd have to think that there's some method to the madness here.
Yeah, this is one that I wish that we could get his perspective on because
Setting up for the late game, I guess, would be the.
yeah. But does the Scranton token get you something that the Albany token doesn't get you?
You can run a double New York pretty easily out of Scranton, and he'll have the Reading and Allentown double dit lay. I'm pretty sure it's guaranteed for him now. So he's probably trying to get out in front of you and set up for the late game.
Yeah, yeah. I was very
He probably
surprised by
figures
this.
that no one's going to really contest Albany for a while anyways, so he'll probably have that.
Yeah,
And you can also, if he floats the B&O, or I'm sorry, B&M for instance, or one of those companies that's kind of running in that same space, not having a token in Albany means that both of his companies can run through there.
yeah. That's always the dream. The problem is that the Erie or the PRR is going to
So there's that possibility as well.
find a way to token there. But that is the dream. Just looking at priority here, Triple
Well,
J is going pretty late in priority,
that is the
so
dream.
he's going to have a hard time floating the B&M, I think, if he makes it too attractive. So he may not want to have laid this track towards the B&M to make it more likely that he ends up with that presidency. Because if he lays this track, almost certainly Clumsy Puppy or R is going to find a way to float that company. So a little bit of non-standard play from the NYNH, but has some potential upsides for him. We'll see how that plays out. He's going to run for just 50 and pays it. He buys the first four, so as I predicted, my CNO won't get to run its two trains, but it only has routes for one train currently anyways, so really not the end of the world. NYNH is done operating. CNO is now up, and I link up with Chicago as expected. I own 40% of the company, but I have another share in the market. So, my liability here, if we look at the entities tab, is that I have enough money in the NYC for a permanent train, but I don't have all that much money in the CNO. So I have to decide, am I going to start withholding here, or am I going to just pay it out and emergency buy a train at some point? I think you can go either way, but I decided to pay out because I didn't make any revenue on the NYC, and I just don't want to fall behind so far. So that concludes 2.1. We'll go to 2.2, which is going to be the B&O. And he's going to upgrade Washington. Does have a 3 train, so running from Baltimore into the offboard is going to be higher revenue than having to hit Altoona. But again, he's just not under any pressure at all to lay track that gets him anywhere. He's just been focused in his little corner and really falling behind in tempo. Would have been really in deep trouble if the PRR hadn't given him access to the west through Altoona, but luckily the PRR was tempted by the Baltimore revenue, so he did get a little break there. He's going to pay out for 110 and is going to buy in the Schuylkill. That brings us to the PRR. He's going to head west towards Pittsburgh. So this is one of those games where just nobody wants to head east towards Lancaster, and I'm really not sure why that is. Why these two players have not made any progress there. Do you have any thoughts?
Very unusual. Very unusual. There's usually a race to get to Lancaster.
Yeah, I wonder if the NYNH teleporting to Scranton kind of scared the PRR off and they didn't want to give him easy access into Lancaster. I'm not really sure how to explain that. But it's going to run 2 trains and it's going to run for 90 paying out. NYNH does get the Reading and Allentown track and is going to lay up for that double run into New York, bypassing Philly. So has really pretty good late game run potential in the NYNH as long as this F18 track gets laid in a friendly manner. He's going to run a 4 train for just 50 because he hasn't been able to link up his 2 runs at all. Pays it out. CNO heading towards Akron, and I lay the number 2 track. Reading and Allentown has already been laid, so the number 2 is kind of irrelevant at this point, but I'm just in the habit of laying it, so I lay it anyways.
Good habit for sure.
I run for 80, I pay it out, and the NYC is up. So I think the NYC is kind of the most interesting company in the game right now because it really is in a rough position. So I have to decide whether or not I want to give myself a run into New Haven or a run into Reading and Allentown. And I had been planning on running into New Haven, but I'm realizing now that a run into Reading and Allentown is the same revenue, and it will give me the option of getting into Scranton through that $120 track in the future if I want it. So I never like laying the $120 track, but I really want to make sure I get into Scranton because with a token in Scranton, I'm going to be in the same position that the NYNH is in terms of these late game double runs into New York, which is obviously very powerful. So I figure I can either lay directly towards Scranton with a gentle curve on F18, or I can lay down into the Reading and Allentown tile, and then I'll have 2 options of getting into Scranton. Whether or not he lays a X or a K on Scranton, he's not going to be able to deny me a run into Scranton because I'll have 2 points of access, either through F18 or through G15. So I end up deciding to just lay the straight into Reading and Allentown and guarantee myself a $30 run, which is underwhelming. But in the next set of operating rounds, I'll be able to get into Scranton no matter what tile Triple J lays there. So I think that was, my only option there. And the revenue for the NYC is pretty poor, but I knew that when I was floating it that it was going to be poor for a while, and I'm really focused on the late game here.
Smart.
Yeah, I think Scranton is going to be the linchpin of this map. Lancaster has been kind of neglected, and this teleport to Scranton has really changed kind of the shape of the track development. Regardless, NYC pays for just 30, and we're into stock round 3. So everybody's bought in their privates now. We have Clumsy Puppy sitting on $200 of revenue or liquidity. R has 450, Triple J has 250, and I have just 100. But I have a 3 to 4 share lead advantage on everybody else because I was able to float one stock round earlier. So if you're looking at the companies here, or the players, I guess, what do you think their options are? I think that Clumsy Puppy would have to sell down kind of heavily on the B&O to float. Two sells of the B&O would put him above 402. So he is potentially able to float here. Do you think you would be looking at the B&M if you're a Clumsy Puppy, or would you be just looking for paying shares? How would you play this?
I'd be looking for paying shares myself. His options are very limited. The rest of the companies, there's none of the ones that are available yet. The CPR, the Erie, and the B&M that are particularly attractive. Whereas just buying a share of, like, say, the PRR, with 2 3 trains, or even the NYH or the NYC, even the CNO for that matter has a really good run, for a very inexpensive price. So, give me some paying shares. I'd definitely buy 3, maybe even 4 paying shares this round if I could.
Yeah, I don't think it's a clear cut decision. I mean, I could go either way. If you don't float here, I think you're probably going to be a one president or a one presidency player for the rest of the game. Very likely that two companies float here, and then Clumsy Puppy probably won't end up with priority and misses out on a float in stock round 4, for instance. So if you don't float here, you may never float. But as you mentioned, at least two of these companies, the CPR and the Erie, are not really that good. The B&M is probably the best of the three, just because it does have access into New York, pretty much
Right.
guaranteed. Um, so I guess I could go either way. This is one of the reasons why I really try and avoid running the B&O, is you end up with so much of your liquidity trapped in the B&O. It makes it hard to find a second presidency. Um, so we'll see what he
Exactly.
does.
But if he's
Uh,
going to sell, he's got to sell now, right? Because he's probably looking at Triple J. Probably has to sell
yeah.
at least one B&O share, and it's going to drop the price. So
Yeah. So you're right. He's under the gun. He's got to make his decision early in the stock round before he can see what the other players decide to do. So ultimately, it looks like he's going to go with the line of thinking that you illustrated, and he's going to just buy a paying share of the NYC. He buys it from the market, which is cheaper than the IPO, of course. But to me, why buy the NYC at all? The NYC's runs, as we've kind of harped on, are not looking good. And you sitting on the PRR where you can buy it from the IPO, get $5 of arbitrage, and it has 2 3 trains. That's certainly going to have higher revenue than the NYC for the foreseeable future. I was just kind of flabbergasted when I see him buying my market share. It was hard to explain that.
does have the greatest long-term potential with the $582, where all the rest of the companies are kind of broke. But
Potentially,
you know,
I see what you're saying. Like the NYC is probably not going to withhold, whereas maybe the PRR would. Um, but I, yeah, I see what you're saying. Maybe that's the
I
rationale.
want some now money though. I would take a gamble. I think that would be the fourth best share for me on the board right now. I would much rather buy all the other ones.
The PRR.
Yeah, the PRR, the NYNH, and the CNO all look better to me than NYC. I'm just trying to think of a reason why someone would buy the NYC, and that's the only thing I can come up with.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
It's only cash.
I think your point about him being worried about companies withholding is potentially valid. So maybe he sees that they've depleted their treasuries and doesn't want to buy in, and then just have their presidents withhold. Um, but I don't know. I think that probably look at other companies. That leaves us R up next. And since Puppy didn't float, R is going to sell out of the PRR, and he's going to take the B&M. As noted, or as we've discussed, of the three companies, I think the B&M is the most exciting. He pars it for max. He has enough cash to float it, so really no liability there. The PRR is potentially vulnerable to a takeover, but really, who has the liquidity to do that? And with 2 3 trains and $0, it's not the most attractive. So I don't think it's at all unreasonable for him to sell out of the PRR as he did for a B&M float. He's probably hoping that nobody steals it from him and he can just withhold it into yellow and run it that way. So I think that's a very reasonable strategy.
Definitely.
Triple J, he is going to buy paying shares. He's really doubling down on this B&O. And I think that's also reasonable. I mean, the CPR and the Erie really are not very attractive companies to float. So even though Triple J has a ton of cash, maybe not eager to sell paying shares to float subpar companies. Instead, is going to just double down on the B&O. Pretty safe investment, and he's getting a lot of arbitrage from the IPO to the market. He'll be able to float it up if he buys that last share. So, just going to be a partner in that company with Clumsy Puppy, it looks like. Which leaves me. I have $108. That's really just one share, unless I decide to start getting fancy. So I'll buy that last B&O, and I have the same rationale that Triple J does. I mean, it's decent revenue, decent share appreciation, and I don't have too many other options really.
Exactly.
That'll bring us back. Actually, having said that, I guess I second thought that I sell the B&O. So, and I think the reason I'm doing this, it's been a while. This game was very long. So if we look at the date here, this was back in February. So I sell that share, and I think it's just because I see that Triple J has a pretty significant investment in it, and I don't want him to get all that arbitrage and potential share value early in the game. I think it would have been very reasonable to hold on to that share, but I must have other plans. Clumsy Puppy, he's going to buy an NYNH, so he's continuing to just buy paying shares and has one more share to buy. R is going to continue to float the B&M. Triple J, he buys a PRR from the market, and I will buy a CNO from the IPO. CNO does have decent revenue, and I am scrambling for revenue since my NYC is going to be so cash poor. Clumsy, last share for him, he goes for the CNO. R is still floating the B&M. Triple J, last share for him will be a PRR. And I am actually going to sell out massively of the CNO here. I didn't really anticipate doing that, but the CNO is already ledged, so at least I'm not hurting my net worth. And I will buy a NYNH. So I think my rationale here is that I'm in a little bit of train trouble when permanent trains break. So I'm just trying to multiply my paying shares. So by filling up my market and then buying other people's market shares, I'm stealing, their paying shares and not reducing the amount of revenue that I control in my companies. And I think that's my logic here. The revenue in the NYNH is probably worse than the CNO, or at least it will be. But I'm not actually losing anything by selling those CNO shares as long as someone doesn't steal the company from me, and I don't feel like that's very likely.
Really smart. I mean, the CNO again, it presents sort of a liability for you, less so now that you have all these, these market shares potentially, right?
Yeah, I think that I would be less excited about someone stealing this company from me this stock round than I would have last stock round. I've kind of rehabilitated it somewhat just because it has $30 of private income each operating round. So I think in the past it had $30. It's already up to 106. Still far off from a private permanent train, but it's kind of slowly working its way up there. But regardless, I do leave it vulnerable for other people's shares. We're going to see B&M just continue to float here, and I have more cash. Triple J is going to sell out heavily of the B&O, so I'm glad that I sold out when I did. So the B&O's share value has really been trashed, and this leaves Triple J a ton of liquidity. So when I'm sitting on the CNO, I'm sitting a little bit scared because I'm seeing that he has $300 cash now. Is he going to go back and take my CNO? But it looks like instead he's going to pressure for the PRR, which is a little bit surprising, right? The PRR has no treasury. It has two 3 trains. I don't know that it's the most exciting company to take over. If we look at the map presence, even its map presence is not that good. It hasn't
Really,
made
it's not.
it hasn't made any progress towards Lancaster, and it's blocked at Reading and Allentown. So I don't really know what the rationale is there. I guess maybe he just wants 2 presidencies and didn't want to run the Erie or the CPR.
Yeah, a couple withholds, and if he gets some track development, in the PRR, and a couple withholds, he's at enough money for a permanent train. So maybe that's what he's thinking.
Yeah, but he's already got the NYNH, and that's a company that needs a lot of withholds for a permanent train too. This is definitely a pretty aggressive play from him.
Very aggressive.
Well, we'll see. We'll see what ends up happening, but he's certainly going to be stealing that presidency at this point. Um, and I buy another NYNH. And I remember this part of the game. It was a while ago, but I was very much interested in the idea of stealing the NYNH presidency from Triple J. But he actually hasn't sold, you know, from the NYNH. So he could defend this. And in order to buy 2 more shares in the NYNH, I'd have to leave the NYC vulnerable to a takeover. And I really don't want to do that.
Right.
So I was very tempted by the idea of taking the NYNH, but I could definitely see a scenario where I take the NYNH and then Triple J just sells out of it and takes the NYC instead, which would be a pretty bad trade for me.
Absolutely.
Um, so the rest of the stock round is the B&M floating, and then Triple J is going to secure his NYNH, and then I believe he steals the presidency of the B&M, or sorry, the PRR, and he does. So R has lost the PRR presidency and is going to have to sell out of the PRR unless he wants to leave himself potentially vulnerable to a dump back, um, which he immediately does. So this is a really nice play from Triple J, right? He's taken a company and he's managed to take priority because he's forced R to sell out. So that works out really nicely
Got a
for
bunch
him.
of market shares sitting there in the PRR too. That's looking great now.
Yeah, that works out really well for him. Because R had to sell out of the PRR, he now has a ton of cash and looks like he's going to buy some paying shares here, picks up the NYNH. I sell out of the NYNH because I'm a little bit worried now that Triple J could dump it on me. And I will go for some cheap PRR market shares. Um, R is going to buy a CNO. I buy a second PRR, which is safe for me to own because the market is pretty full. R is going to buy a B&O that's been trashed and 1 more CNO. But he actually trashes it, which is kind of silly because it's just $1 of arbitrage from the
Right.
IPO to market. Doesn't do anything except give me another market share. So I'm actually very happy
Thanks.
about that.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks. Thanks a lot. Right.
Um, and then he buys his final share in the B&O, and we pass into the operating round. So a pretty chaotic stock round, one where I think there was options for a lot of players to do crazy things, but the only player that really ends up coming out ahead of that, I think, is Triple J. He managed to snag a presidency with decent map presence in the PRR, and he has retained priority. So that ends up being pretty good for him. Clumsy Puppy, if we're just thinking about the game state overall, is still in a rough spot. He's got the single presidency in the B&O, and it's been really trashed in the stock rounds now. R has the sole presidency of the B&M. The B&M is kind of a lackluster company. We'll probably be able to get into New York, but I don't anticipate it getting much further. And then you have me on the NYC and the CNO. I have a fair amount of train liability. The NYC's track is questionable. It's a work in progress. And then the CNO needs to also get east to have decent runs later in the game. So I think that it's still anybody's game. I don't love Clumsy Puppy's position in the game, but I think the other 3 players all have kind of options here.
So if I were you, I'd be thinking about, where can the CNO get a token? Because if you get token out of Pittsburgh, which is really the only place that they are right now, right? The PRR and the BNO, you'd be in a really bad way. So yeah, I wonder if that was crossing your mind too. Like maybe I just better, get that token, jam that token if I can.
Yeah, I think that's a very prescient comment, as we'll see. But I don't think I was too worried about it actually. But we'll see. We'll see what ends up happening here. So B&M's first up. He lays Providence. Good news for the NYNH player who has a 4 train. Doesn't token it and will buy a 4 train. B&O is going to block the CNO, or not block it, but prevent me from running into Pittsburgh, at least for the time being. And he drops the token in Pittsburgh. So this is exactly what you were talking about, where this is a dangerous situation for the CNO. Because the H8 tile has been laid, I cannot just link up with Pittsburgh. And the token in Pittsburgh from the B&O is going to prevent me from dropping a token until Pittsburgh's upgraded. So basically, it's a long way of saying that there's just too many track points between the CNO and a upgraded Pittsburgh for me to snag that token right now. It's going to run a 3 for 110, pays it. NYC is up. And I think the NYC decision here is actually kind of interesting to talk about. It's something that I thought about a fair amount in this game. And I end up deciding to pay the $120 to lay G15. And this is something I alluded to before, but the Scranton upgrade is either an X or a K, and the X and K can both be oriented in two separate ways. So while it's tempting to lay F18 and just try and lay towards Scranton directly, it's very likely that Scranton would be upgraded in an unfriendly manner to block me. So I just figure I have to bite the bullet and lay J15 and guarantee myself a run into Scranton in the next operation.
Yeah, that's really smart.
Yeah, I mean, it's painful. It's painful to do it. I really was not happy about this. But I sometimes I think you just have to take the guaranteed access instead of trying to be greedy and just save yourself a few bucks. So I do lay it, and still I'm stuck on just $30 of revenue. NYNH is
Rough
up.
start for sure. Rough start for the NYC for sure.
Yeah, and I mean we saw this coming when I floated the company. This is not a surprise. I just really didn't want to run the B&M, so
Hmm.
I made my bet. I have to lay in it.
That's right.
That brings us to the NYNH. NYNH is going to upgrade Providence, doesn't want to upgrade its home, and doesn't want to lay my track for me on Scranton. So it's going to just run for 10 extra dollars, take advantage of his 4 train, runs for 90 and is withholding. Buys a 3 train out of the PRR. That's his new presidency. So the NYNH now is in a really good position. And I think, this is something we didn't talk about in the last stock round, but the fact that the PRR has 2 trains may have been a pretty compelling reason that Triple J wanted to take that company over, because he realizes that in the next operating round, his NYNH is going to have pretty good runs for 2 trains. And this avoids pushing trains further. He's able to just rearrange the trains in his presidencies to run them very efficiently.
Yeah, great play.
CNO is up. I upgrade H18, but as you've kind of alluded to, I'm not able to token in Pittsburgh, and we will see that that ends up working out pretty poorly for me. PRR has just enough money for his token, courtesy of the NYNH. Giving him money by buying that 3 train, and he upgrades Pittsburgh and tokens me out. So this is something that, going back to the very first stock round we had talked about, this is the liability of the CNO. Yes, you have pretty good early game revenue, but if you don't get access to the east, where's your late game coming from? I don't have the teleport on the DNH. So I'm really kind of locked into the west of the map now with this token. This is really bad news for the CNO. So looking at the game state, I have a NYC that has been running very poorly, but is now finally going to start getting runs through Scranton. And then I have the CNO, which has been running okay, but now is kind of screwed. So the two companies have really flip-flopped in terms of their value in my portfolio.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Um, PRR is going to run his 3 train for 90 and pays it. And we are into operating round 3.2. B&M is up and is going to upgrade Boston. Didn't feel like paying the $80 for New York. And actually, with a 4 train, wasn't going to reach New York anyways unless he tokened to Providence. So I think that's very reasonable. Um, Paying for 100. NYC.
It looks like the NYNH player really has to upgrade New York now, right? They're kind of in a spot. They have no other options. So
Um, well, I mean, they can lay track out of Scranton, I suppose. Um, but yeah, I would expect probably to see that. Um, so the NYC has upgraded Scranton, and now I'm going to be forced to token there just for better runs, basically. And I will run for 60 instead of 30. So finally making progress here.
moving on up, right?
Yep. I pay it out, and the B&O is up. B&O is going to start heading up towards Rochester and Erie. Um, this is one of the reasons why I felt pretty obligated to token in Scranton. If the PRR was able to take advantage of these track lays from the B&O and get into Scranton, that would probably be game over. Triple J would have 2 companies with potential for double runs into New York. I don't think that's really a survivable scenario for the rest of the table. But I've already negated that with the token. B&O is going to run for 110, pays it. CNO. At this point, the CNO is kind of dead in the water until Brown. The thing that I criticized myself about a little bit was that on H8, I laid the tile. I'm going to look at the tile roster here. Um, I laid number 23. I really think that I should
Mhm.
have laid a number 18. It's the straight with the sharp turn. And if I had done that, I would have still had options to lay east on the CNO and start contesting track south of Dunkirk and Buffalo. But because I laid directly into Pittsburgh, which is something I can't even run, I'm stuck until Brown and have no capability of bypassing Pittsburgh. So I think that, I'm going to call myself out and say that the H8 tile lay that I played here was pretty bad.
Yeah,
But
a lot of people forget that tile is available. That's kind of a unique tile.
yeah,
But I think you're right. I think that would have been a great move.
Yeah, I was kicking myself for that. Um, but I'm going to make the best of a bad situation and just lay some unfriendly track on G5 so that people don't have easy ways to upgrade directly into Chicago. If you want to prevent the B&O and the PRR from running into Chicago, you got to kill G5 and G3. So I'm just starting on that. I think there's very few scenarios in 18xx where passing and just laying no track at all is reasonable. If you have valid track lays, you should be taking advantage of them. There's almost always a tile that you can throw away to hurt another player, or you can plan ahead and just start blocking access to runs later in the game. So even though this G5 track is kind of random, I think that there's no reason not to lay it, and I'm glad I did.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. Every advantage that you can create for yourself, no matter how small, and every disadvantage you can create for your opponents, no matter how small, those little things really add up to big things in the long run. And
Absolutely. I
we'll
mean,
see that, I think, here.
the cumulative effect of lots of little things over the course of 8 or 9 operating sets will end up being the deciding factor in who wins and who doesn't. So that's why CNO is going to pay for 80 PRR. Lays Lancaster. This is a very late Lancaster lay. We're in 3.2 and finally seeing someone lay that track. Um, it's going to run for 90, pays it out. And the NYNH, last company to operate, is going to finally upgrade New York. And this is just because he's running 2 trains, so might as well take advantage of it. And because he was operating last, he pays the $80 and is immediately able to reap the rewards, and none of his opponents are. So, just continuing the trend from Triple J of very efficient play, things are really going well for him, I think.
He's making lemonade out of those lemons he's been handed. Really making the best. He's kind of been behind a little bit, I think, in position, but really making the best use of it.
Yeah, maybe a little bit behind. I don't think it's looking terrible for him, but he definitely has a lot of train liability between the PRR and the NYNH. But he's running for 210 here. He withholds it. Now all of a sudden his companies are looking a little bit better, and he's got an early yellow company, so he's going to be set in terms of share density for the rest of the game if he's able to maintain this yellow.
Absolutely.
That brings us to stock round 4. Triple J, as noted, had priority. And then everybody has, between $120 and $170. Triple J and I are ahead in shares. So still pretty even game. We've commented that Clumsy Puppy is kind of fallen behind. I think that remains the case. But even he is not eliminated in any sense. It's still viable for him if somebody else drops the ball. I think he could sneak into first, just a little bit behind the other players. Um, Triple J has successfully looted a train out of the PRR. PRR still does not have very much cash, and he's got $120. So if he wants to float a company, I think he would have to sell down the PRR pretty heavily. But the problem for him is that the market is full. So we may just see a little bit of a stall here. And I think that's in both my interest and Triple J's interest. We're leading in shares and we both have train liability. So if nobody's floating companies, nobody's pushing trains, our market shares are just paying, our expensive privates are just paying. I think that both of us are kind of happy with the status quo.
Yeah, I think so. There's two four trains still sitting there, so it looks like it's going to stall.
Yeah. And I guess, the counterpoint to that is if 2 players are happy with the status quo, the other 2 players need to be motivated to change it up because that means that they're falling behind or, not making the progress that they need to be making. So we'll see what happens here. But I'm anticipating neither myself nor Triple J floating a new company. Triple does sell down the PRR. and he's going to buy paying shares in the B&O. If we remember back to the last stock round, he had a pretty hefty investment in the B&O and then trashed the company. So he's just buying those cheaper shares again, um, and hoping to take advantage of the revenue. Uh, that leaves me. I will buy an NYNH. Clumsy Puppy is going to buy the NYNH as well. So that company's floating up. Cheap yellow shares are being bought up. R is going to buy the B&O as well. And just like we said, it's starting to look like a stall. Triple J buys a B&M. Track Talk buying a PRR. So this is interesting, right? I am now up to 30% of the PRR right along the President Triple J, and one more share purchase will give me the presidency. We were talking about how Triple J was playing aggressively in the last stock round. This is pretty aggressive play, I would say, from me as well. The NYC has close to permanent train money, not quite there. The CNO is far off, and then the PRR is very, very far off. So if I steal this company, I'm going to have 3 presidencies with no guaranteed permanent trains. But I'm just thinking to myself here, the map position of the PRR is pretty good. So even though there's a big liability in taking it over, if I don't bankrupt, I'll be in a pretty good position for the late game. So it's kind of a high risk, high reward type play.
I like it.
Clumsy is
Yeah,
going to,
I like your play here.
well, we'll see. We'll see if you like it a couple operating rounds from now. um, Clumsy Puppy is going to buy B&M. R is selling the B&M and going back for a paying share in the NYC. Triple J is passing. He doesn't want to sell the PRR before I'm forced to buy a market share, I assume. I think this company's already ledged. It is. So it doesn't really matter that much, but he's going to force me to sell a share to buy the PRR. So I'll sell out of the NYNH, put it in orange, which is something I'm always very critical of other players for. So I am fully aware that I am being a little hypocritical sometimes. But the PRR is too attractive for me to pass up. I steal it, and I'm probably hoping that other people will take those orange shares before Triple J is able to snag them. Clumsy Puppy, he's passing. R is going to sell my NYC. He sells very heavily out of the B&O as well, and this is scary for me because we've been this entire stock round talking about how we're expecting to see a stall. I've just dramatically increased my train liability by taking over the PRR, and now R is going to respond by selling out and actually floating the company. So the idea of a stall now is a little bit less certain, and we see him float the Erie. He also puts the NYNH into brown, which is good news for Triple J. He's got $90 worth of shares in the market, and he has $87, so he could easily snap those up. But yeah, this was, I don't know if you follow my channel, but this is when I posted my little joking short about me being in danger. I was pretty afraid.
Ooh, I'm in danger. Yeah, Ralph. Yeah, that was great. I love that.
I'm I'm uh, I'm pretty nervous at this point in the game about my long-term prospects. There may be a bankruptcy in my future if things.
Well, it's this is 1830 at its best, right? So, it's players recognizing, hey, if this kind of goes the way it's going, I'm losing, right? So I have to do something. I have to make a move. So it's sort of like you've kind of end ran around, Triple J, and then R is saying, oh well, gosh, I got to do something now. I'm going to start falling behind. So everybody kind of making moves is that's how you play 1830. If you're losing, you better figure it out.
Yeah, I think 1830 is a game that lives on the knife's edge between first place and bankruptcy, and I think we're starting to see
Absolutely.
that develop here. So R has floated the Erie, or at least parred it, and Triple J has a bunch of brown shares, but he's going to sell out of the PRR. Doesn't want me to dump it back on him, and he will buy all the shares out of the market. So he's pulling ahead in share lead. That brings me to my last action. I'll buy a paying share of the B&M, and then we'll just see R float the Erie. So I think we can move pretty quickly through the rest of this stock round. Erie is floated, and I will do just a little trashing here. This is actually something that is is worth talking about. So with the Erie floating, I wanted to make sure that my companies were operating in between R's two companies because I didn't want R to be in a position where he could buy a four and then pick up a four and five in one of his other companies. So I'm not just trashing the Erie to be spiteful. I'm actually trashing it intentionally so that the B&M and the Erie are not going to operate consecutively because I don't want him to have the easy way of buying multiple five trains. So by doing it this way, if the B&M buys two fours, the Erie can buy a single five, and then I will be able to buy a five on the NYC and probably shuffle cash around between my next two companies to pick up a second five. So I'm really trying to manipulate operating order very intentionally here to prevent myself from bankrupting and also potentially incentivize R to, even though he's floated a new company, just maintain this status quo and stall the game out a little bit. Um, so I think that,
Really smart, really
yeah,
smart play.
I mean, I think it's something that maybe newer 1830 players or less experienced 1830 players really neglect to do, particularly when you're potentially facing the train rush or the breaking of permanent trains. I've talked about this a lot on the channel with your 1830 league, where I'd like to see players, manipulating turn order in the stock round a little bit more. So this is just an example of why I think it's so important to do that. But I think that's the last thing that, actually, having said that, Triple J is going to sell the B&O and he will just reserve the presidency of the CPR. CPR, I will note, is not a viable suitcase in this game, courtesy of me. I was the Champlain and St. Lawrence player, and I laid the Burlington tile. So he's going to reserve the presidency of the CPR, but it's not going to be a suitcase. And that will finally conclude that stock round. So another kind of complicated stock round. We've had two in a row. But I think that's just kind of where 1830 shines. So I don't mind the complicated stock play. B&M is going to be leading us off in operating round 4.1. He's going to lay the $120 track into Providence, and it allows him to bypass a DIT. It also potentially offers him access into Albany later in the game. So I don't hate it, but facing permanent trains potentially, it is painful to lay that track. He really didn't have too many other options, I guess, in terms of track lays. What do you think? Is there anything else
Yeah,
he should have done?
you don't see that very often, but it does still leave him with plenty of money. Like he's got enough money for that second token and a five train, or with the he's really close to a six train as well. So
It does
um,
put him out of money for two four trains if he was trying to buy through the two four trains into the fives. Um, I guess in theory he could withhold to do it, but I don't think we'll see that. So, if you're sitting in my position with, three presidencies, no permanent trains, no permanent train money, I'm actually happy to see this because I think it indicates that they were probably not going to see an explosive train rush here. Um, but yeah, it's just notable, an unusual track lay.
you don't see that. Yeah, very very seldom do you see that. It
Um,
also opens things up for the NYC to get into into that area as well, which I think we'll probably see here later.
Yeah, definitely. So, you're laying a $120 track to bypass a DIT, but your opponent is going to take advantage of that same track. So it's really, um, it cuts both ways, I guess I would say.
Hmm.
B&M is going to run for 150, pays it, and he does buy a four train, but just buys a single four train. I suppose that's one other consideration is that by laying that track, he now has two runs out of Boston for running his trains. So he can double tap Boston. Um, But I think you need to be careful buying these four trains. There's not a whole lot left as a barrier between the players and the fives. So I guess he's hoping for a stall too, and he can just take advantage of running two four trains for a while. Um,
Yeah, that seems odd to me. I wouldn't have bought that train, I don't think, but
well, we'll see how it works out for him.
I guess
Uh,
we'll see how it goes. Yeah.
yeah. B&O's up, and they are going to link into that G5 track I laid with the C&O last turn. Really doesn't improve their runs at all. Not really sure what the rationale there was, but he's going to run for 110 and pay out. Erie's first operation. Erie is going to lay towards the east, potentially heading over towards Rochester. He's already tokened at Scranton and Pittsburgh, so probably eventually he's going to hope to get towards Albany, but it's going to be a while for him to get there. And he buys a 4 out of the B&M. So I guess that's another reason to buy the 4 in the B&M, is it allows you to shuffle your cash around and redistribute your treasuries. If you're going to buy the train anyways, this allows you to do it in a little more flexible manner. So I think that's something that we were neglecting. That ends up being a pretty clever technique from R, I would say.
Okay, yeah, I like it better now from this perspective, right?
Yeah. So there's still the poison 4 in between us and the 5s, and he has managed to redistribute his money with no downside, really. Pretty clever. That'll bring us to me on the NYC. I will upgrade Philly, and I upgrade Philly so that I can run through there in the future. I'm going to run my 3 train for 100, and I pay it. C&O is up. Not really sure what track I'm laying at this point. I think I'm just throwing a track that I think other people will eventually need. And actually, now that I think about it, I am doing that. So the reason I lay the tight upgrade on H6 is because I was worried about that track ending up on G15 and allowing the NY and H to run into Lancaster through G15. So I'm trying to deny that option. I want all the focus to be on Philadelphia and New York. And the reason for that is because I have such map control between the PRR and the NYC. I want to be able to shut that corridor down with the tokens in those 2 companies. So I really don't want people to be bypassing Philadelphia or Lancaster later in the game. C&O pays for 80. PRR, my third company, is going to head north, and I'm sure there was a reason for that I've now forgotten. So just running for 110, pays it. And one thing I'll point out here is that even though I have 3 companies with no permanent trains and very little cash, I'm actually not withholding at all. And the reason that this is possible is because I have very full markets. Both the C&O and the PRR have 5 shares in the market, so there's really no reason for me to withhold. That cash is coming to me either into my personal treasury or into the company treasury, regardless. So I'm just getting free stock appreciation with these payouts. And I'm looking at this game state and I'm saying, if I can do this for another operating round or 2, not sets, but just operating rounds, I'm going to be in great position. People really need to start pushing trains because I'm getting, $55 of private income. I have full market shares paying into my companies. I'm going to be able to afford all the trains I want and more if they let this go on. So I think other players are really under the gun here to start pushing trains.
Absolutely. Yeah, you've got a ton of market shares.
Yeah. Part of that's intentional. I've intentionally been filling my market throughout the game, and part of it's, I think, a shortcoming from the other players. They haven't been prioritizing buying my shares enough, which is just the way things work out sometimes.
Sure.
NYNH, Triple J's company, is last operate. He's got great runs for this company and he owns 80% of it. So I am definitely worried about this. But I do notice that in order to stay yellow, he's going to have to withhold at least a little bit. So maybe he won't get all the revenue from these companies. He's running for 250, which is really strong, and he pays it out. We are into 4.2. B&O is laying down south. Really unclear where he's heading here. I'm not sure. He also notably has a full market, so with payouts, he's going to be pretty close to permanent train money. He actually is there at 450. B&M, he is heading over to Albany. So he already laid the $120 track, and he wants to make sure that he's not just trapped in the east of the map behind New York. Probably is hoping to get a token in Albany, if I had to guess. Runs for 150, pays it. NYC. He upgrades, or not he, I upgrade Albany. I'm happy to cooperate with the Boston player and get runs there. Run for 100, pay it out. C&O. Again, I'm just trying to block access into Chicago for later in the game. There are valid upgrades that would allow G3 to upgrade directly into Chicago, but it's also very possible that I'll be able to throw those away before they get laid in anywhere that would allow people into Chicago. Running for 80, paying it out. PRR. I actually have, I think, blocked Erie here. So Erie will not have a run because I threw away the track that he needs to get into Rochester on G3. So not only have I blocked Chicago, but I've also killed the Erie's run, at least for the time
Brutal.
being. So yeah, the Erie player R did not push into the 5, so he doesn't have access to brown track. So he's blocked for the time being unless he starts pushing trains. So I think that's, there was multiple reasons to lay G3 the way it was, and I'm just really playing kind of nasty 1830 here, trying to just take out my opponents.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's brutal, but it's really heads up play.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at R's portfolio here, he's got 60% of the Erie. That's half of his portfolio, and it's just fallen back twice now. So he's lost a lot of progress in this game by floating that company. PRR is done. Erie's up, and he gets an upgrade, but it's something that I can block in the next operating round. Still doesn't have any runs. Doesn't buy into or doesn't push trains with the Erie either. NYNH is heading up towards the CPR. So I think Triple J has reserved that CPR presidency and is hoping that the CPR can quickly get a run down into Albany. Does have to worry a little bit about the B&M token because I think we'll probably see that in Albany before the CPR can get down there. But I think that's the rationale there. Runs for 250 and pays it again. That brings us to stock round 5. So I have priority here, but there's really not anything left afloat. None of my companies are dumpable, so I'm just going to be looking for paying shares here. I like to periodically just look at the game state, so I'll do that here. I'm first up. I have nearly the most shares, just trailing by 1 with Triple J. But I will point out Triple J's share lead is a little bit of a false impression because he does have 2 shares in the CPR that are worthless right now.
Right.
So I'm technically leading in shares, functional shares at least. And I have close to the most net worth. So I think I'm in a pretty strong position, but I do have a lot of train liabilities still. Clumsy Puppy has been trailing for most of the game. I think he still is in a pretty rough spot, just has the 1 presidency and is not going to have an opportunity for a second one. I think R was in a decent position, but got kind of lazy on the Erie and didn't push trains, so now half his portfolio is dead. And then Triple J has the NYNH, which is really strong, but the CPR is probably not going to be a very good company, so also in a tenuous position, I guess.
What do you think about the payout with the NYNH last time? He's
Instead of
got 80% of it. Now he's in the yellow.
Yeah, instead of withholding. It's
Yeah.
only well, actually, yeah. I mean, that's a good point. It's going to cost him both shares. I thought he was 1 share above the orange, and he would only have to sell 1, but he's going to have to sell both. Um, yeah, I mean, I think that if you're Triple J, you're probably having to assume that you're going to have to withhold at some point in this game. So you're right. Probably
Hmm.
withholding at least once there would have been better. That said, it would have cost him a fair amount of money into this stock round, and he wouldn't be able to pick up as many shares as a result. So there is a trade-off here, but I definitely see what you're saying. And I think the other thing that makes it even worse for Triple J is that he's operating right ahead of me in priority. So anything he sells, I'm going to be able to snap up. So when he sells those N18 shares, guess who's going to be buying them? Me.
Sure.
So yeah, I see what you're saying. I think that a withhold probably would have been better. It means less shares in this stock round, but he also wouldn't have to sell 2 shares. So I guess that's pretty good.
Probably
Um,
thinking the CPR has to float and he's got to push trains, or you're just going to run away with this game with all your market shares.
yeah, yeah. And I guess this way
Because he
he
could,
doesn't have to sell paying shares in other companies. He's going to have to sell shares
right?
either way to float the CPR, basically. Either he pays out and sells the NYNH or he doesn't pay out and he has to sell paying shares in other people's companies. So,
Sure.
Yeah, I guess he's put him, but this is kind of his own fault, right? I mean, he reserved the CPR presidency. He didn't have to do that. He could have left it available to someone else. Let's say he leaves it available and Clumsy Puppy floats it. Now Clumsy Puppy is saddled with this kind of crappy CPR, and he's going to be the one that has to push trains to change the game state. But Triple J has kind of taken that burden upon himself by reserving this presidency.
You want something done right, you got to do it yourself, right? Is that what they say?
Fair enough.
Yeah. He was probably hoping that R was going to push trains on you, but they didn't.
Well,
He
I
just kind
was
of
again, I was really expecting him to do it, and I'm still a little bit surprised that we didn't see that. So I think
yeah.
that's definitely something I'll criticize R for is not pushing trains here. All right, well, let's continue with the stock round. I'm up and I will just buy a paying share. I'm buying my NYC. At this point in the game, I'm envisioning that the NYC and the NYNH are both going to have great runs because they both are set up for double runs into New York. So the NYNH is not available. The NYC is. That's the share I buy. Um, Clumsy Puppy is going to buy an Erie. That makes no sense to me. There's a huge deficit IPO to market to buy in that share. The Erie literally doesn't have a run, and it's tokened out everywhere pretty much. So that's not a high yield
Yeah.
share.
I can't think of any rationale for that.
Yeah. R, he doesn't have a lot of cash, so he needs to be very careful what he's buying here. He buys a B&M. That's a very expensive share. There are cheaper shares. There are even shares that he could buy and then sell, the NYC, for instance, for a little more cash. So not a huge fan of that either. Triple J is going to sell two shares of the NYNH. He was forced to do that by the engine, of course. And he's going to buy a B&O. He's under no rush to float the CPR. I think we're going to see that happen, but he is fully aware that there's high yield shares that he needs to buy first, just to deny them other players. So
Exactly.
going for the B&O here. I'm back up, and I will snag an NYNH. Clumsy Puppy snags the other one. He's up to 30% of that company. R is almost out of cash, so he's going to sell one of his Eries and buy my NYC. Triple J is going to buy my NYC. I will buy a B&M. Clumsy Puppy picking up a PRR. So he is finally going to be one of the players to start depleting my market shares. And we've been criticizing people for not doing this, but there's a good reason not to, right? As soon as my market's depleted, now all of a sudden I'm really not incentivized to pay out anymore. I'm incentivized to withhold. So either way, I'm going to be getting the revenue from my perspective as the
Right.
president. But the other players may not want to buy these shares because they recognize that if they buy them, I probably won't pay out. It still hurts me, of course. My shares aren't appreciating in share value if I withhold. So I think the other players still have to do it, but I understand why they're reluctant to. Archero is going to pass. Triple J is still buying paying shares in the B&O. Slash share from me, I buy a B&O. Clumsy Puppy is passing. I see this a lot in kind of lower level play, people just sitting on cash. They're so afraid of the dump that they don't want to buy any shares. I don't think that Clumsy Puppy has to be worried about investing in the PRR, for instance, one more share. And he will pick up a PRR. So actually, sorry, he's selling the PRR. So filling my market back up, I'm happy to see that. And he will be floating the CPR. Clumsy's still passing. It looks like Triple J is the only one taking actions, and we'll just be floating the CPR. CPR is now floated, and we pass into the operating round. So 5.1, and does that leave me with priority? Yes. So I still have priority. And we're into 5.1. We'll see if anybody wants to buy any permanent trains here. Looking at the operating order, the CPR has more than enough cash if they want to buy the 4 and the 5. And if they do, that will open up 5s for my companies, which is pretty good for me because I don't have a lot of cash. I need some cheap permanent trains to avoid a bankruptcy. So I think I'm pretty happy with 5 trains breaking here if they were to. Um, all right.
Yeah, looking great. You've positioned yourself very well.
I think so far things have gone pretty well. B&O is going to continue heading down south, and it's really unclear to me where he's hoping to get with this. I suppose eventually into the Gulf, but kind of low yield. Running for 110, B&M is not going to lay any track, and will token Albany, so that's bad news for the CPR, but I think that was very predictable. I don't think that Triple J is going to be surprised to see that at all. runs for 150, pays it, and then the CPR is going to lay B18 to make sure he doesn't get locked into just running Montreal and Burlington for the rest of the game. He lays it in an interesting fashion, though. I've seen this done by other players, and I'm really not sure what the logic here is. By laying it in this orientation, you're forcing yourself to run through that dit for basically all of your runs. I don't know why you wouldn't lay the gentle curve just running directly from Montreal to Ottawa. Do you have any insight there? Why that might be?
I guess with this orientation, you can kind of run like a loop through Montreal, hit the dit, and then kind of connect through all of your track. And the CPR really has a lack of track early in the game.
Yeah, but I mean, even if you don't lay it with this orientation, you just run directly from Montreal to Ottawa. You still can hit Burlington if you want, because you can run through Montreal into it. So I'm not entirely
Right.
sure what the rationale is here, and it ends up becoming relevant later in the game. We'll get there, but
Mhm.
it just seems like a strictly worse way of laying the track. Because you're going to be forced to run the dit, and if you're running anything other than a D train, you really don't want to hit dits usually. Um, so I don't
Right.
know, but we'll talk about it again later. He buys the four. He buys a train out of the NYNH and then breaks into the fives. That leaves the CNO in a position to do a quick withhold, and actually may not even need to withhold, depending on what the revenue is with 5 shares in the market. So I get that H8 upgrade. This is the upgrade that I neglected to set myself up for early in the game. We talked about, but I now have a way to bypass Pittsburgh. Whether or not that actually comes to pass remains to be seen. But I'm very pleased that I was able to secure that track there. And then my revenue is going to be 110, which is half of that is going to be going to my treasury, which is more than enough for the permanent train. So I actually, well,
Very nice.
I wonder why I withheld that. I'm not entirely sure why I withheld that. I had the
Looking at a
exact,
token maybe.
yeah, it must be token money or something. Um, I had exactly enough money to pay it out and buy the five, and I didn't do it. So there must be something that I'm forgetting. But I buy the five train, that's good for me. And then there's a second five train with my name on it, but I'm not going to be picking it up with the PRR. PRR is going to upgrade Philadelphia, so I managed to link up my companies through Philly. And I run for 110, pay it out. And I think this is why, actually, I don't know. I'm trying to rationalize my CNO withhold and I still can't do it. But the PRR is going to
Sure.
buy the train out of the CNO just because the PRR's runs are better than the CNO's runs. So the PRR now has a permanent train, and the NYC is up. NYC upgrades New York and is going to have to with actually. Hmm, I'm really misremembering this part of the game. The NYC is able to withhold and afford the last five train without having to withhold. So at this stage in the game, I'm looking pretty good, I think. I have two permanent trains for two of my companies, and I have almost $400 in the last company. So a bankruptcy looks unlikely at this point for me.
Agreed. Yeah, agreed. I think your portfolio is looking great.
Erie is up, and Erie is able to get a run for himself. I was planning on screwing the Erie over, but the five trains came out, so I realized even if I laid a tight turn on D12 down into the double O, he would be able to get an upgrade to get a route on his double O. And it was more important for me to lay the Philadelphia track with the PRR, so I didn't even bother trying to screw over the Erie. I think at a certain point, being spiteful is more work than it's worth. You might as well just do what's good for your company rather than trying to hurt another player's company. So that was my logic here.
Cost benefit analysis, right?
Yeah,
Are you losing more by hurting them than you are by helping yourself?
yeah, exactly. So Erie is able to get an upgrade and run down into Pittsburgh. Pretty poor revenue still, just 70. He's going to withhold it, which means he does not get a six train, at least not yet. NYNH is going to upgrade Scranton. And with a four train, is going to be able to double tap New York, which is kind of the dream. So running for 210 with a single train. He withholds, and that has just enough money for a six train and snags it. So we were just talking about how I'm probably not going to bankrupt. But if you look at my game position, Well, actually, it's not as great as I was hoping it would be. um, I've got two permanent trains and $400, but that sixth train is going to be bought up before I can get it. So I am on the hook for, $800 or sorry, $700 worth of train, and my liquidity is only about $700. So I probably won't bankrupt, but if I buy the D train in this operating round, I'm going to be in dire straits for the rest of the game because I'll have to sell very heavily to do it. The saving grace here is that the operating order of my companies is such that I'm going to get to run both of my permanent trains before I need a D train. So the situation would be much worse and very different if, for instance, the PRR needed the permanent train and not the CNO. But things work out pretty well here. And I don't think this is by accident. This may have been another reason why the CNO withheld instead of
Held.
paying
Yeah,
out because I
makes
was
sense now.
yeah, trying to change my operating order. It's as an aside, it's surprisingly hard for me to remember this game, even though I swear I spent many hours thinking about these things at the time, but it just doesn't stick with me like it should.
It was 2 months ago, you said, right? So
Yeah,
that's
it was a
one
very
of the
long game.
downsides. Yeah.
All right,
Yeah, it
S
just ended, what, 2 days ago, you said, right? This
yeah,
is a really, really fresh game.
yeah. All right, so that'll bring us to the B&M. B&M is going to upgrade Boston, run its four train, and withholds to snag the final six. B&O here, sole presidency company, and is going to be forced to buy a D train. So we've been kind of commenting about Clumsy Puppy falling behind throughout this game, but this is the nail in the coffin. Buying this train is going to really put him out of contention for the win. So he has to sell very heavily. Importantly, sells all those lucrative NY&H shares that are going to be great for the rest of the game and are very cheap and barely affords his D train. So um, I'm going to say here that Clumsy Puppy is now eliminated from the game, even though he's not bankrupt. That brings me to the PRR, which is my first company. PRR is going to upgrade Pittsburgh for just revenue, pays for 260. Still not withholding on my companies, even though I'm fully aware of my pending train liability. And this is really just because it has a full market. So I own 90% of the revenue in this company. There's really no reason for me to withhold for that extra 10%. Um, CPR is going to run through Ottawa, running his five train for just 80, pays it. NYC, second of my companies to operate, upgrading Albany. And again, I think this is just for revenue reasons. Actually, it can't be because I'm not actually running that track. So I forget why I upgraded Albany there. In retrospect, I probably could have looked towards E21, the track right next to Albany, and given myself a run from Albany into New York that way. So I suppose I'll criticize my Albany track as well
The
uh,
triangle would have been better, you think, there?
on E21
Yeah,
between Boston and Albany. Yeah, I think so.
right.
I mean, not that I'd necessarily run it this turn, but for the late game, it would give me options, a little more flexibility.
Definitely
But
makes a big loop, right? It kind of completes a big loop all through the rest of your track. So yeah,
yeah,
that's a good observation.
yeah, I think I would do that differently in retrospect. I think one thing I'll say is I think I was still a little bit worried about the potential for NY&H to run through Lancaster with proper upgrades. So I think I wanted to deny the brown track on Lancaster. Um, but in retrospect, that's really not a real threat. So I think I'll stick to my guns and say that the Albany track lay was a mistake. Um, NYC runs for 260. I am withholding here, and that's because I only own 70% of this revenue. So it makes sense to withhold for my permanent train. It also, again, I'm being a little bit tricky here. I'm trying to make sure that the operating order in the next operating set is optimal. So by withholding on the NYC, and I'm going to have to fall back on the CNO, I leave myself the option of buying the permanent train into the CNO in this operating round and then selling an NYC so it falls down and the CNO operates ahead of it again. So I'm just trying to kind of, I guess, shuffle my trains around in a way that allows them to operate without having to fall back and not run for any revenue. Um, NYC withholds.
Definitely a skill you got to learn, right? When you're when you're playing this game, right? How to shuffle these trains and kind of make the most of that situation.
Yeah, I mean, it can get really complicated. And, the strategy I'm outlining here, there's no guarantee it works. The other players have an impact or a role to play in this game. They can mess up my operating order very easily, but this is the goal at least. Um,
Right.
the, and then CNO is going to shuffle trains here because I am not going to go into a stock round with no money. Um, I want to make sure that I'm able to buy shares to deny them other players. The other thing that CNO does is it lays G9. So I'm just working on trying to bypass Pittsburgh and get access into these double O's at some point. Erie also needs a permanent train. The R player has a single six and is not at risk of bankruptcy here, has just enough money, I believe, to afford a D train by selling. But he's in a similar position as me where he doesn't want to enter the stock round with no cash. So I believe he's going to end up shuffling trains here instead of buying the six or buying the D. NYNH is going to round out the operating round and is going to lay the E21 track that I was kind of kicking myself for not laying. So I think he's probably aware that the NYC is eventually going to want to run through E21, and by laying this track has basically blocked me. It's also an opportunity potentially for the CPR to get down into Providence in New York with an upgrade on D20 and then linking up the CPR. So I think there's multiple reasons for him to lay that track. Runs his
Definitely.
six for 280, and we are into the stock round. So little bit of a tenuous position for me. I still need a permanent train. I think I'm in a decent position, but this is a very close game between me and Triple J. You just in terms of net worth, I'm only up by $35, and he has satisfied his train liability, and I haven't. So I need to be very careful how I do things here. Um, the other two players are pretty much out of this game. Arshiro is still on the hook for a train. He's very far behind in net worth, and then Clumsy Puppy, he has a D train, but he's fallen so far behind in shares, he's out of this game. Uh,
Absolutely.
so that will lead me off in the stock round, and I'll buy the cheap NYNH. Um, and I think I'm just looking for cheap orange shares. That share is actually not that great for me in the immediate future, just because I need shares that are going to pay early in the stock round or early in the operating round before my NYC or CNO operates. So this NYNH is not helping me on my D train aspirations, but I think I just am recognizing that I'm going to start getting close to my cert limit, and I don't want to miss out on these cheap shares. Clumsy Puppy, he's going to buy a B&O. That's a little bit uh, strange to me. He only has one, share's worth of money. Um, by doing that, he could have picked up a cheap Erie. He could have picked up a cheap NYNH and then tried to get two shares. But to be honest with you, I think I'm going to stop analyzing Clumsy Puppy's actions just because he's kind of not a factor in the game anymore.
That's
Um,
fair.
and then R, he is going to dump out of the B&M, which is pretty aggressive for a company with $630 in it. Um, but I guess he assumes that nobody wants to take it over because it's going to need a D train, and that's going to be a $500 hit to your net worth. No guarantee that other people don't steal that company, though. I think it'd be reasonable, for instance, for Triple J to take that, who's already satisfied their train liability. Um, but
Sure.
he's going to look towards buying other people's shares to try and fund his D train. So he will.
Right.
Having said that, he actually goes back to his Erie, which is not going to help him fund his D train for now. Triple J is going to buy a B&O. So I'm looking at this game state now, and I see a D train in the B&O. And I own much fewer shares of it than Triple J does. And I've kind of identified Triple J as my competitor for the win in this game. But if we look at the map, the D run of the B&O looks great, so long as it is not tokened out at Lancaster. If it's tokened out at Lancaster, all of a sudden that D train is pretty poor because it's going to have to run down through Baltimore into the deep south offboard. So I'm pretty happy that Triple J is doubling down on this B&O because I see that the NYC and the PRR both have tokens left. And if he maintains a high investment in the B&O, I'm going to kill that run. So I'm not actually that upset with Triple J heavily investing in the B&O.
Sure.
Back to me, I will buy an NYNH. So the fact that nobody's buying these cheap NYNH shares is allowing me to keep up with Triple J in terms of share density. But I am still very aware that I have a D train hovering over me that could force me to sell a lot of shares. R is going to pick up the last NYNH share. Triple J is going to buy the Erie from the market. I will buy my NYC. The NYC is an attractive company in the future. Right now, it's not very attractive, just because it's going to be falling back. R is going to buy the PRR. Triple J buys my NYC. Still not technically dumpable because there's a share in the market, but really investing in my companies for these other players is a little bit risky because I have 3 presidencies, so it's very easy for me to dump one of them. We'll see if that actually ends up happening or not. I will buy a PRR, and then R is going to start pressuring the CNO. CNO with a permanent train is a valid opportunity for a takeover, and I actually don't have enough cash right now to defend it without selling shares. So I think R has recognized this. Triple J is going to sell a CNO, and he will buy the PRR. I'm passing, and I think the reason I'm passing here is because I'm recognizing that the CNO is vulnerable, and I want to see if R is actually going to press for that presidency. So I don't want to invest cash and then be forced to sell a share to defend the CNO. We'll see what R does here. He does buy a PRR and sells the NYC. So I think that was something that I was a little bit worried about. I was hoping that the CNO was going to operate ahead of the NYC, but the operating order actually ends up not working out. So I had this, grand scheme of which company was going to operate first, and then other players have kind of sold my shares and thrown a wrench in that plan.
As they should, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I can't fault them for it. But
Yeah.
when I was
Yep.
talking in the last operating round about my grand schemes, just realized there's always a asterisk there until they actually come to fruition.
Exactly.
Um, so I go back and buy the PRR, and I think this is probably also a mistake. I was talking about in the last cycle of stock actions how I didn't want to invest my cash to see what R was going to do, and he manages to lure me into a false state of security here. So I invest my cash, and then he goes back and starts pressuring the CNO. So that's going to force me to defend. So I'm at the point in the stock round now where R is at 30% of the CNO, and I'm also at 30%. And I have to decide what to sell here in order to protect my presidency. So I end up deciding to sell an NYC, and this is something that I really come to regret later in the game. I think there were probably other shares here that would have been a better sell. I would have loved to have sold a B&M here, but the B&M market is full, and R has kind of trapped my investment in that company, maybe intentionally.
Yeah, maybe that was a mistake. I think you had priority deal, right? At the
Yeah,
beginning
I
of the
absolutely could have sold a B&M in advance. I probably should have done that. And that would have allowed me to retain an NYC share, which is going to be very relevant for the way the game ends up.
whole
Um,
lot better than the B&M's going to be, I'm guessing.
um, R is going to really pressure the CNO here. He takes it up to 40%, which is going to force me to sell another share. And I'm forced to sell that PRR share that I bought. None of my presidencies are vulnerable now, but that was very painful. R did a very good job of putting me to task here as I try to afford a permanent train. That also costs me priority, and we will go into operating around 6.1. So both myself and R are in a position where we need a permanent train, and we are going to take very different approaches in how we make that come about. PRR is first up and has a permanent train. So I'm going to lay into the double O's, and this is just to set up the C&O run later in the game. It was a little risky laying D12 instead of G11 because the B&O still can block the C&O at G11. So if I was trying to guarantee the C&O runs, I probably should have upgraded G11 here with the PRR. But I played a little greedily, and it actually ended up working out. You see here that even though I'm worried about a D train, I'm going to proactively token in Lancaster. The B&O is going to get one run on its D train through New York, but by tokening here with the PRR and then subsequently with the NYC, I'm going to make sure that it's only a single run. So this is not really an attack on Clumsy Puppy, but it's an attack on his co-investor, Triple J.
Right. This is sort of the chickens coming home to roost for Clumsy Puppy on that token he laid earlier in Washington would be much better off, saved to lay somewhere else later.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a great point. He could have defended his run through Lancaster if he hadn't thrown away that token on Washington, 100%. B&O is going to upgrade Lancaster to get his running for 320, best run in the game, but this is going to be short-lived. CPR is, as noted, laying B18 with the hopes of eventually getting down into Providence, but that's going to be pretty easy for me to prevent. And again, at this point in the game, I'm laser focused on Triple J. These other players have no bearing in my calculations. Everything I do in this game from this point forward is to hurt Triple J because I really envision this being a close game between he and I want to make sure I come out on top. So there's absolutely no way I'm going to allow Triple J to get a token down into Providence, New York.
It is extremely close.
Yeah. CPR is still running for 80. CNO is going to get the upgrade on G11, so it wasn't blocked. Very pleased by that. Runs for 160 and withholding it. And, despite everything I said about how operating order wasn't going to work out or it was going to work out, at the end of the day, it ends up working out. The CNO operates ahead of the NYC. So I was able to run both of my 5 trains and withhold with both of them, getting myself pretty close to a D run or a D train. B&M is going to do my work for me and blocks the CPR from ever getting into Providence, New York at D20. And he's going to have to shuffle a train here or sell to afford his D train. And it looks like he ultimately decides to sell, which is pretty bad news for him because he was invested in the CNO, expecting it to pay out, and I withheld on it. So he actually got no value at all from all those shares he bought. And he sells 6 shares to buy his D train. If we just look at the game state here, we've kind of written off Clumsy Puppy, and now we can write off our Chiro. Although he has his D run, he only has 9 shares compared to 20 shares from Triple J and me. So it's come down to a 2-player game at this state. I, on the other hand, am aware that you almost never want to sell shares if the game's going to go late because it comes down to who has the most shares usually wins. So instead of selling shares, I'm going to continue to shuffle my train until I can afford it, the D train, without selling anything, basically. There is a downside to this, right? You have a train that is just falling back. You're hurting your share appreciation. So there is a downside, but I think this is almost always the better way to afford a train. So
Absolutely.
the NYC is going to lay track here. And what I'm looking at with this is that I am envisioning a D train run from Pittsburgh up through Philadelphia and New York into Scranton, and then back around into Albany, back through New York and into Boston. So I'm basically just setting up for a monstrous D run with a big loop. The other players have stuff to say about this. They can interfere, but I'm going to token Lancaster right now to cut the B&O run, so they're not going to be able to interfere with the loop. And then it's going to come down to the NY&H and the B&M to see this loop coming and decide whether or not they want to mess with it with Tragic Track. So something that Triple J in particular should be aware of and working to prevent, I think. NYC is going to shuffle the train out of the CNO. NY&H has a 6 train and is actually going to cooperate and work towards creating this loop, which I was very surprised to see. With just a 6 train, his run is pretty set. I don't imagine that this loop is going to benefit him at this stage in the game. So I was surprised to see this. Runs for 290 and is withholding, and he's withholding to stay yellow, which is kind of painful. So I'm falling back on my train, but he's forced to withhold. So even though I don't have all the trains I need, he's actually not able to build up a huge lead on me. Erie is going to lay on G19, and I think he's just working on setting up a run for himself into Chicago. One thing I neglected to comment on was that I think it must have been the B&O actually laid the G5 upgrade to get a run into Chicago. I think that's why I wasn't blocked on the C&O at G11. He took that track lay instead.
Right.
So the Erie lays or runs for 120, not much. We're into 6.2. CPR somehow is the first to operate. Upgrades Ottawa for a little bit extra money. Runs for 90. B&O has been blocked at Lancaster, so instead is going to run through Baltimore. But you can see that I've cut his run by $80. So in terms of, net benefit to Triple J, I've really reduced it by a fair amount. PRR, I think I was still worried at this stage of the NYNH being able to bypass Lancaster or something. So I'm just trying to really lock down that track. I forget if there was another reason for that or not. Actually, I think in retrospect, I was trying to prevent that upgrade from being laid on D12 because I was worried that people were going to try and run through Rochester into the double O's. I don't know. There were very few track lays in this game that I didn't think about a lot. So there was always kind of a reason behind what I was doing.
I can tell. And the reason that it wasn't clear to me initially, and then looking a couple turns down, you can see, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, and actually, now that you've reminded me, actually was a very specific reason I laid H14 there, and we'll see that very shortly. PRR pays, and I'm going to shuffle money into the NYC. The NYC is now quite close to affording a D train without having to sell any shares. I do lose the run on that 5 train by doing this, though. B&M is going to lay D16, and he is hoping to get into those double O's, but the valid track lays have already been exhausted. Running for 290, but only owes 20% of it, so not that exciting. NYC is going to basically just work on securing his loop. I was a little bit worried about the way this would work out because depending on what the NYNH lays on D16, he could make it impossible for me to create the loop and then still run into New York through F18. But I was also worried about just being blocked at F18, so I had to pick the lesser of two evils. And I figured even if D16 is laid in such a manner that a loop becomes impossible, I always have the $120 track on E17 to lay. Right. So I figured F18 was the safer move. I buy the D train. I don't have to sell anything to do it. And for the rest of the game, I will just be paying out basically to try and come back on Triple J. The fact that I have had to buy a train out of pocket and fall back on some of my companies has put me about $600 behind Triple J, which is not insurmountable, but it is kind of nerve-wracking. So we'll see if I'm able to come back from this deficit now. The C&O is going to lay Tragic Track on Erie to block the Erie company from running 2 routes through its double O. And then I buy a train out of the PRR. So all my companies have trains at this point, and I'm just going to be trying to overcome my deficit. Erie doesn't have a whole lot of track left to lay in this game. It's going to be making small changes, but we can mostly ignore the Erie now. The NYNH lays D16. There is a valid upgrade that will still give me the gentle curve I need on D16, but clearly has aspirations for getting into the double O's. I will note that the C&O also dropped a token on the double O just to secure its runs and prevent any, wayward D trains from getting into there. And I think that was mostly directed at the B&O. I didn't want the B&O to, find runs through the double O's.
Sure.
NYNH is going to withhold. And the dangerous thing here, from my perspective, is that the NYNH is getting very close to D-train money. Triple J is pretty heavily incentivized to withhold at least once more to stay brown. So he's going to end up with 900 something dollars, or actually close to $1,000, um, and could potentially look to run two trains in the NYNH, which is going to be pretty devastating. Generally, you don't want to withhold for a permanent train, but if you have to withhold to stay brown or stay yellow anyways, then it makes a lot of sense to just take advantage of the train while you're there. So that is something that I'm pretty nervous about at this stage.
Yeah,
Um,
they've made really good use of their Scranton token. I was sort of critical of that earlier in the game. You know, I've never seen it utilized so well. I don't think as they're kind of really making the most out of it this game.
yeah, I think they're getting their money's worth for sure. And if they're able to run two trains in the NYNH, they have the potential to actually like triple tap New York, because they can run one train into it twice and then the second one out of it once. So
Exactly.
that's potential for really high revenue. Um, the negative side of things for Triple J is that the CPR is just a total dog. Running for just $90. The only thing working for the CPR is its share value, but the share value is at the mercy of the other players. So it's not at all a safe place to have your money invested. Triple J is slowly working on getting over to the double O's to try and rescue the revenue of the CPR, but it's just so hard to have the CPR amount to anything in these games because it needs so many track points and it doesn't have a natural ally to develop its routes for itself. So he's going to be running for 90 for a while. Um, he pays it out. B&O. Um, the Erie and the B&O are going to work for the rest of the game to just try and min max their revenue, but it doesn't end up being anything very significant. PRR. This is why we saw the H14 lay in the prior operating round. It's because I've noticed that I can run for quite a lot more money with the NYC by running through Lancaster down into Washington and into Baltimore than I would if I was just running from Lancaster into Pittsburgh. So I've managed to get the track points to work out just perfectly that the NYC's first run is going to be optimal. The NYC is going to upgrade D16 and have an excellent D run the first time it runs.
Wow.
Um, B&M is going to get into the double O, but I've preemptively tokened there, so really nothing for him to do. Runs for 340. I'm not worried about the B&M at all. I'm not worried about any company that Triple J and I have equal investment in because, again, I'm only worried about my position relative to Triple J in this game at this point. So the B&M, I don't care what it does as long as we both have equal investments in it. NYC gets the D16 upgrade, and my D train run is going to be for 530, which is the best it could be with the existing track. So I'm very pleased with that, and I'm really, I guess, putting all my eggs in the NYC basket to come back from my net worth deficit on Triple J. Erie is going to create a loop for itself, so it increases its run by $20. The C&O is also able to take advantage of this loop, so I wasn't all that worried about it happening, because any improvement for the Erie is going to be an improvement for the C&O as well. C&O has sole access to the double O's at this point, and I just need to make sure that I lock down this double O and prevent the CPR from getting in there. Because if the CPR runs dramatically increase, then Triple J is going to just walk away with this game. So I pay it out, and the NYNH is the last company to operate. Withholds one more time is at 997. So one more withhold will give him a D train. And if we look at the market here, there's $8,000 in the market, and my usual cut point for the game ending is $6,000, just as a rough estimate. So I'm looking at the game and I'm saying that there's 6 operating rounds left in this game. And if you look at the NYNH's position on the chart, if he floats up and pays, he's going to be leaving orange. So I'm anticipating him potentially withholding one more time, just to make sure he stays yellow for all the rest of the operating rounds. And that means he's going to certainly have D-train money. So I'm a little bit nervous here because I think that in the current game state, I'll win. Because I'm tired with shares for Triple J and I have excellent revenue in the NYC, but I'm realizing that the NYNH may be able to run two trains, which is really going to change things. Um, so it's still not clear who's going to win this game. Triple J certainly has a lead, but the NYNH is a wild card that may you know make it hard to predict who's going to win. Um, this stock round here, I think, is what ultimately ends up determining who wins this game. I don't want to give away the results, but this is a pretty key stock round. So I will talk about it a little bit, but after the stock round, I think we can start moving through the game very quickly towards the end.
Okay.
Um, so Clumsy Puppy is eliminated. He's going to buy an NYC. One thing that I was very worried about at the start of this stock round was that I was not going to be able to afford a sixth share of the NYC, or not afford, but that it would be bought up prematurely since I'm going last in priority. And if Triple J gets a share of the NYC and I don't, that in of itself could be game determining because the revenue of the NYC is $50. So with six more operations, that's a swing in your net worth of like 300 something dollars, ignoring the share value. Um, and if we're in a game where it's only separated by $500 right now, you can see how a swing in net worth of $300 could be very significant. So I was
Absolutely.
super worried about what was going to happen with the NYC share, but R is actually going to go back for his B&M, which is a strictly worse share. So this guarantees that I will get a share in the NYC. So when I'm talking about this stock round being very key in determining the winner, this was one of the things that I think ends up determining the game. The other thing that ends up determining the game, I'm going to move through this kind of quickly here, is that R is going to end up buying kind of weird shares here so that I'm able to buy everything I want. I get my yellow CNO. I am able to max out my investment in my PRR. And R is going to just start buying these CPR shares. The CPR is not a bad company, actually, because the share appreciation is so high. So even though it's only running for $90, you have to add like $20 to that to get its true value because the share on the market is increasing by $20 each time as it runs. So it's not bad.
Sure.
Um,
And you get $42 just for buying it, right?
right. But
In that.
it becomes really bad if you trash it, which is what R immediately does. So this is
Hmm.
kind of crazy. And I will say that this is objectively a mistake because R has spent two stock actions buying these shares and then sells them. Meanwhile, everyone else is buying everything else. So what is he going to buy instead, right? There's just not enough share actions left in this share round for him to make this worthwhile. So the only thing that this does is it really hurts Triple J. Triple J has lost a ton of net worth as a result of his shares in the CPR being trashed. And I don't really think there was any reason for R to do that. So if you want to say that there's king making in 1830, which I guess is a little controversial, this could well meet some people's criteria for that. Because I
Well,
don't
there's
think it.
inadvertent and there's on purpose, and I think that this tease seems pretty inadvertent, but yeah, it certainly is having a big impact on the effect of the game.
Yeah, I
The
mean,
endgame game.
Triple J was like up by $500 or something on me, and now he's only up by less than 300. So that's a huge swing in net worth. And what I'm seeing now is that I wasn't going to bother trashing the CPR because if I trash it just once, it's going to float back up and it will have no effect. But now that it's been trashed already twice, if I continue to trash it, it's really going to have a huge impact on Triple J's endgame net worth. So I need to basically buy the high value shares, and then I'm going to go back and further trash the CPR. And this is only possible because R has done it before I was going to do it. Um, so what ends up happening in this stock round is really just made possible by R. I was not going to trash the CPR otherwise. Triple J sells out of the Erie because the Erie is running for much less than the PRR, and he wants to just kind of adjust his share portfolio a little bit. So he buys the PRR, and now there's really nothing left for me to buy that's attractive. So I feel comfortable now going back for the CPR and trashing it even further. So I'll buy the market share. Clumsy Puppy is going to buy a Erie, and then I'll buy another market share of the CPR and sell it down. Uh, which is going to happen at some point. There. Okay. So I've now trashed the CPR even further. Triple J is now barely like $150 ahead of me in net worth. And then I am free to go back and hit my cert limit on the Erie. So the CPR shares were probably better value than the Erie when they had a high stock value. But now that they've been trashed 4 times, the Erie is actually, I think, the better company.
Agreed.
So that stock round ends up working out perfectly for me. Like I don't think I could have asked for a better stock round. And I have to, thank R a little bit for it, because I definitely couldn't have done that without him trashing the CPR. The rest of the game is kind of not that interesting. When I was playing it, I was still a little bit stressed out, just because there were certain track things that I wanted to happen. But I don't know that we need to go through it in detail. Was there anything else that you thought was worth talking about?
No, I think it's kind of an exciting finish here.
Yeah. I think that the
And
game after Stock Round 7 has been determined. There are 2 more operating rounds, but I have such map control that I can really dictate how the board plays out. Um, so we'll move through this quickly. There's 3 points that I'll make a comment on, and then we'll skip through the operating round very quickly. The first is the CNO. So the CNO needs to make sure that the CPR doesn't get into the double O's. And he can do that, or I can do that with 2 track lays, upgrading the double O and then laying D18. And then there's just no way, D8, sorry, no way for the CPR to get into the double O. The second thing is that if we look at the market share position of the CNO, I want to make sure that I end up at 67 so that I can sell a single share of the CNO and get back into yellow. I don't want to withhold unnecessarily to stay yellow, because I'm relying on the revenue from the CNO to put me ahead of Triple J. So I'm going to withhold and pay out so that I end up at 67. And that will allow me to sell a single share to stay yellow. And that was the D18 upgrade. So I'm realizing that if the NYNH withholds to get a second train, and then it's able to run a D train through D18 into the CPR's track, the NYNH's revenue may be high enough for Triple J to win this game. So I'm going to make sure to throw away track on the D18 that's going to prevent the NYNH from ever running north through there. So
sure.
those are my kind of considerations at this point in the game, but I don't think we need to go through the track action by action. We're going to skip operating round 7.1 and 7.2, and you can see that I've managed to block the NYNH from ever linking up with the CPR, and the CPR does get access down into Boston, but that's kind of just small potatoes, not going to change the game state. The NYNH does end up withholding for the second train in it, a D train, and his revenue ends up being 530, exactly equal to the NYC. So really good runs, but
Wow.
my saving grace here is that I own 30% of the NYNH, so it's going to be helping me a lot as well. With that said, we'll skip into stock round 8, which will be the final stock round in the game. And you can see that I was successful in having the CNO end up at 67. So while I'm exceeding my cert limit, I'm going to be able to fall behind it by selling a single share. Triple J, on the other hand, also is going to have to sell shares to get behind his cert limit. So I was able to maintain my share lead. Not a whole lot interesting happens in this stock round. I will just point out that both Triple J and I have had to sell shares, but I have had to, or I've been able to maintain a 3-share lead on him. This is the final operating round in the game, and there's not really anything else to say. It was a very boring operating round. I've succeeded in cutting the map up so that nobody has any real meaningful track lays left. So
Run and pay,
yeah, pretty much.
basically.
So we will just look here and say that at the start of the operating round, I was ahead of Triple J by just $10. And at the end of the game, I managed to eke out a victory on him by a margin of like $106. So very, very close game, difference in net worths of about 1%. And I think that's both Triple J and I played well. And this is just the way 1830 works sometimes. Factors that are beyond your control or very minor things end up determining the winner. So I took it.
They sure do. I mean, it's, there's probably 10 or 15 different things if you really wanted to look at and identify that if they would win a different way, he wins.
Yeah. And
You know,
I think that's pretty typical in a certain level of 1830 play. It just comes down to small things here and there. You could identify any one thing, and it would change the victor one way or the other. Um, so I'm
this is why we
happy.
love 1830, right?
Yeah,
This is why it's such an amazing game. I mean,
it was a nail biter. Very long game. It took 2.5 months to play out, um, but very satisfying in the end because I was able to win. I don't know if I'd say it. I don't know if I'd be as happy about the game, obviously, if I had come in second, but that wasn't what ended up happening. Um, so, looking at the status of the tournament, this is actually the first game in round one to fill a round two table. So we have the option to start the round two game at this point. And the other three round two tables are still waiting to be filled. So I think we're going to be stalling in the tournament for a little bit, but I will continue to record all the games as they finish, and we'll see who ends up winning. Hopefully, it'll be more tight, exciting games as we continue. So thanks
yeah,
so much for coming on the channel. It was great to have your input and just some kind of neutral thoughts about this game. And I really appreciate you taking the time.
my pleasure. My pleasure. Hope to jump in again someday.
Yeah, I'm sure we can get you back on and find some other games to comment. We've been doing a lot of 1830 on the channel recently, but hopefully we'll find an opportunity for some other titles. All right. Well, thanks to the viewers for sticking with us, and Track Talk will be back.